Today it is officially December, and here at Comic Book Chronicles, that means it's time for me to start saying nice things about my favorite comics of the year. But the format for 2025 is going to look a little bit different than it did in 2024. Folks, I'd like to officially welcome you to the Baldy Awards, the month-long award show that honors my favorite comics of 2025. The Baldies, the only award show more follically challenged than the Oscars. And the very first Baldy Award that I want to present in 2025 goes to, wait for it, Hyde Street from Ghost Machine and Image Comics. Hyde Street is Ghost Machine's resident horror comic book. We're specifically looking at issues 3 through 9, which came out this year. Our author is Jeff Johns, our pencilers are Yvonne Reese and Francis Portella, our colorist is Brad Anderson, and our letterer is Rob Lee. You know, you can nitpick at various different things about Hyde Street, I certainly have, but at the end of the day, I don't think I had more fun with any comic book in 2025 than Hyde Street, and that's why I want to talk about it here. Hyde Street is about like a purgatorial, in-between kind of dimension where monsters and or demonic entities and characters fight to either save souls on Earth or condemn them to the underworld. And our main storyline is about the dynamic between Mr. X-Ray, who's like a salesman type who wears 3D glasses, and Pranky, who's an evil Boy Scout character. And that dynamic between Mr. X-Ray and Pranky is fine, it's interesting, but to be honest, at least as far as I'm concerned, it's almost secondary, because the creators of Hyde Street have really been focused on populating the world with various different monsters and demonic entities and telling their stories. Like, for instance, we've met the matinee monster of Hyde Street, who's like a Frankensteinish kind of character. Miss Goodbody feeds off people's body image insecurities. Dr. Ego, we just met in issue 9. He's an evil plastic surgeon. And these characters not only play into the ongoing story, but we see their background and their history and how they got to be on Hyde Street. And really, that's where some of the more horrific stuff that we see in this horror book comes into play. Like, for instance, there's a scene in issue 4 where the scorekeeper character, like who's responsible for tallying up everybody's souls, hammers a bunch of nails into the matinee monster's face. I can certainly appreciate a horror book that's not afraid to be horrible in that respect. But yeah, it feels like world building is every bit as much a priority in Hyde Street as the narrative that's driving the book forward. And that approach doesn't always work, but they made it work here. Some of my favorite moments from 2025, I liked this image from issue 3, specifically for the look on the kid's face when the burglar says the line about Santa Claus. Issue 4 might have been my favorite issue of the year, just because I like the matinee monster and the old Hollywood feel of that issue. One of my favorite comic book images and 2-page spreads of 2025 was this image of the matinee monster about to take on the monstrous cereal mascots. It's got like an epic feel to it. I also really liked the opening scene from issue 9 where a young Dr. Ego talks to a famous person that has just been operated on. It's got a really unsettling feel to it, especially when the blood starts to come through the bandages. You know, historically, I'm really not much of a horror guy, but Hyde Street is a horror book that has managed to work its way to the top of my stack each week it comes out, and that is why it gets a Baldy Award. The Baldy Awards, ladies and gentlemen, sponsored in spirit by Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's. They're not really a sponsor, unless they want to be. They Choose Violence, a 5-issue limited series that AWA Studios brought us this year, focuses on an anger in our culture right now that's powerful and relevant and real and raw. And to its credit, it managed to talk about all that stuff while still remembering to be entertaining and engaging and, fun to read. And that is why it earns a Baldy Award, officially designating it one of my favorite comics of 2025. And of course, the Baldy Awards are sponsored in theory this year by Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's. They're not really a sponsor, unless they want to be. Our author here is Sheldon Allen. Our penciler is Mauricio Campatella. Our colorist is Danielle Carmanico, with letters by Matt Bowers and covers by Raza. They Choose Violence is about a trio of black women who basically get sick and tired of all the racial injustice that they're seeing in America and decide to respond violently. Very, very violently. I don't know if you can tell, but I am not a black person. I don't claim to speak for the black community, or any community really. But nevertheless, They Choose Violence really made me feel a lot of the hurt and anger vicariously that I'm sure so many African Americans feel, not just in the modern era, but across generations, at the injustices that have been committed against them by the judicial system. And that's such a powerful thing for a comic book or any piece of art to be able to do. It kind of transcends its medium and reaches out and touches your heart. The story is also fittingly violent. You can't deny that. These characters act on the anger that they're feeling, and they go to an extent that the story actually becomes a commentary of sorts on the nature of violence itself. And of course, these characters see hate and violence returned to them. This story does have villains, after all. The dialogue between our three main characters also feels very natural and very real. They have a chemistry together, not just when they're talking about big, important things, but just when they're in conversation. And that's not always an easy thing to do, especially with new characters that you've never met before. I think if I could pick one comic book to show to the general public in 2025, it might be They Choose Violence, because it really has the potential to jar you out of apathy and ambivalence and make you see some of the anger and feelings that are really out there. And to that extent, the trade collection for They Choose Violence comes out later this month, I believe, so I highly encourage you to check that out. In 2025, the Marvel superheroes took on Donald Trump and the Trump phenomenon. Kinda, sorta. And for having the guts and the temerity to call America and the Trump phenomenon out, One World Under Doom hereby gets a Baldy Award, officially naming it one of my favorite comics of 2025. One World Under Doom, of course, was written by Ryan North, with pencils by R.B. Silva. Our colorist was David Curiel, our letterer was Travis Lanham, and our covers were done by Ben Harvey. So in this story, Dr. Doom is the Sorcerer Supreme, which means he has Doctor Strange's powers, and basically Doctor Strange's job. And he presumably uses that power to make himself king of the world, emperor of the world. They call him Emperor Doom. All the world's governments are beholden to him. He has all the power. But instead of doing supervillain type stuff, he basically becomes Mr. Nice Guy and offers the world free health care and free education to all who want it. He really decides to make the world a better place, seemingly. And as such, a lot of common people, a lot of regular people, get behind Dr. Doom and devote themselves to him and say things like, "Doom will save us." The Avengers and the rest of the superheroes in the Marvel Universe aren't so sure about things, though, and this story shows us how things unfold from there. So to be clear, the story isn't specifically about Trump, okay, he's never named or anything, but it is about this outsider who comes along and says, I can fix everything that's wrong in the world if you just give me all the power and let me have all the power. And that should ring a bell to anyone who's lived in America for the past 10 years or so. But the thing is, unlike with the current administration, Dr. Doom actually does make certain things better in the world, and One World Under Doom is very much an examination, a study of power, and what happens when you trust one person with all the power, and how that affects the world. And I mean, let's not kid ourselves here, folks. Marvel is one of the biggest entertainment entities in the world, okay? It's in a position where it doesn't have to publish a story like this, or do a story like this anywhere. But they did, and I really respect that choice and that decision, and Marvel made One World Under Doom a compelling and interesting and fun story. Not surprisingly, the story is very Fantastic Four-centric, as Dr. Doom is the arch-rival of the Fantastic Four, and of course Ryan North, our author here, has done great things on the Fantastic Four ongoing series. Artistically, some of my favorite moments in the book from R.B. Silva and David Curiel are the scenes between Dr. Doom and Valeria Richards. There's a page in the final issue, issue 9, that sort of shows us the history of their relationship and injects some really nice personal humanity into things. Ben Harvey also gave us some great covers, this one being my personal favorite with the Thing in the foreground here. You know, if you've been reading superhero event comics for years and years like I have, it can be hard to make them stand out sometimes. I mean, sometimes they all kind of blend together, but I really felt like One World Under Doom was really about something and had something to say, and that's really what drew me in. And that, of course, is why it gets a Baldy Award. The Baldy Awards, sponsored in theory by Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's, they're not a sponsor, unless they want to be. This year, Absolute Wonder Woman gets what I will classify as a preemptive Baldy Award, signifying that it is one of my favorite comics of 2025. Why is it preemptive? I'll tell you in a minute. So Absolute Wonder Woman is of course part of DC's Absolute line of comic books, which are designed to strip classic characters of sort of their continuity and their baggage and kind of cut them to their essence and their core. Absolute Wonder Woman is about a version of Diana that was raised in hell and came to Earth. Her adventures this year included fighting and defeating a tetracide monster in Gateway City and journeying into a maze, like a labyrinth, to find another Amazon. Our author for all the issues this year was Kelly Thompson. Our colorist was Jordi Belair. Our letterer was Becca Carey. Our regular interior artist, as well as our cover artist, was Hayden Sherman. But then we also had issues this year from Mattia De Ulis and Matias Bergara. So we're specifically looking at issues 4 through 14 here. Now, perhaps conspicuous by its absence is issue 15, which has not come out yet. It comes out December 24th, Christmas Eve. I'm making a point for most of these Baldy Awards not to honor ongoing books that haven't finished their 2025 output yet. For Absolute Wonder Woman, I'm making an exception for 2 reasons. The first is that Absolute Wonder Woman's 2025 output thus far has made it one of the best, if not the best, book that DC is putting out right now. So issues 4 through 14 deserve to be honored in and of themselves. The second is that issue 15 is going to have Absolute Batman in it, and I've made no secret of my relative distaste for the Absolute Batman stuff. And I don't want issue 15 to taint my perception of Absolute Wonder Woman's 2025 output so that I deny it an award it rightfully deserves. So that's why the award is preemptive. It's kind of cautiously preemptive. One of the great things about Absolute Wonder Woman in terms of Kelly Thompson's writing is that it's got a softness and a tenderness and a soul that I wasn't necessarily expecting, especially based on how some of the other Absolute books have gone. I'm particularly thinking of Wonder Woman's adopted mother, Cersei, when I say that. And some of the things that Cersei says and thinks and believes in this series about Diana and what it means to be a parent and how it rings true. Hayden Sherman is able to follow suit in that regard, but quite frankly, he's also just really good at drawing monsters and stuff. Like, early in the year, we saw not just the Tetracide monster, but we saw this skeleton Pegasus that Wonder Woman rides. I also really dig Sherman's redesign of Dr. Poison, and his take on that character as like a gaseous being encased in like a tank. It's cool. Sherman's layouts and the way he plays with like panel shapes tends to be really fun too. In my opinion, Absolute Wonder Woman really does the best job out of any of the Absolute books of cutting to the core of its iconic main character. Obviously there's a lot of differences here from the traditional Wonder Woman status quo and canon, but it still feels familiar. It still feels like Wonder Woman. And that's the whole mission statement of the Absolute Universe, as I understand it. For months, I've kind of toyed with the idea of comparing Absolute Wonder Woman with All-Star Superman. I know that's a lofty comparison, and it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, but I think that Absolute Wonder Woman is the closest thing we've gotten to a Wonder Woman version of All-Star Superman, if that makes sense. The first collected volume of Absolute Wonder Woman, which collects issues 1 through 7, I believe, is available now, and the second collection, Volume 2, which has issues 8 through 14, comes out in February. And be sure and keep your eyes on Comic Book Chronicles for all of December for more Baldy Awards. The Baldy Awards, sponsored in theory by Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's. Not really a sponsor, unless they want to be. Every time I've talked about Rook Exodus from Ghost Machine and Image Comics, certainly every time I've talked about it this year, I've made a point to put over Jason Fabok's art and Brad Anderson's colors because they come together to make what's really some of the best comic book art that I've ever seen. I'm not being paid to say that. I'm not getting any fringe benefits. I believe that. It's just so richly detailed and layered and gorgeous that it creates this almost immersive experience that draws you into the issue and the world. And when you put it that way, giving Rook Exodus number 7 through 9 a Baldy Award and officially designating it as one of my favorite comics of 2025 kind of seems like the least I could do. This is a sort of post-apocalyptic sci-fi story that takes place on a planet called Exodus. Our main character is Rook. He's what's called a warden, which means he has technology that allows him to telepathically communicate with and control animals, in his case, birds. And long story short, he and his two cohorts, two other wardens, are trying to find another character called Bloodhound, who, despite being insane, has the ability and the knowledge to fix Exodus's broken world engine and save the planet. And in the story that started this year, Rook and his cohorts come together and track Bloodhound into basically a den, a lair of giant spiders. And as if that wasn't a big enough problem, there's also a deadly character called Stag who wants Bloodhound dead for some reason. As I mentioned here, our artist is Jason Fabok, and our colorist is Brad Anderson. Our author is Jeff Johns, and our letterer is Rob Lee. Rook Exodus spent most of the year on hiatus, but in October it came back with issue 7, and then it followed up with issues 8 and 9. I continue to really enjoy and love Jeff Johns' writing, and I really appreciate and dig the world he's helped to create here with Rook Exodus. And he really does a fantastic job with this book of teeing up Fabok and Anderson so that they can take the big swings and hit the ball further out of the park than you could hope for. Also, other sports metaphors. All the rich detail that's put into such simple things like costumes and the weather give the art on this book a tremendous credibility that really comes in handy once the sci-fi elements start to come in, like the giant spiders and things like that. You believe it. Stag is also a really cool villain, a really cool assassin type character. I've kind of poked fun at the antlers on his helmet a couple times, but he does have an aura about him, and the outfit is cool. You know, other Ghost Machine books like Geiger and Hyde Street have had different artists tag in over the course of their run, and I'm not knocking that approach. Okay, certain ideas invite other artists and other perspectives to be a part of the tapestry. For what it's worth, though, with Rook Exodus, I would really advise against switching the artistic team in any way, at least for the foreseeable future. Fabok and Anderson's vision and execution for this world has just been so vivid and unique that I don't want to say another artistic team would be a step down, but I think that they would be a really hard act to follow. And quite frankly, at this point, I think they've earned the right to keep us seeing this world through the lens that they've created here. For my money, Rook Exodus is really a book that begs you to pick it up, hold it in your hand, and pore over the art, as opposed to just consuming it on a phone screen. I think this is a book that you want to have physically. And to that end, there's a deluxe hardcover edition collecting Rook Exodus number 1 through 6 that I highly recommend. Be sure and check back in this space all month long for more Baldy Awards as we continue to celebrate my favorite comics of 2025, the Baldy Awards, sponsored in theory by Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's, they're not really a sponsor, unless they want to be. Everything Dead and Dying issues 1 through 4 are part of a story that has an almost surprising amount of raw humanity in it. A story that's, in its own way, beautiful. And that's why it gets a Baldy Award, designating it as one of my favorite comics of 2025. So we are in a zombie apocalypse setting here. Our main character is Jack Chandler, who has been living with the zombified versions of his husband and adopted daughter for some time. And in addition to his family being kept intact and, kind of in their old routines via muscle memory, Jack has also been able to keep his small town intact with all the zombies and various people he knows kind of sticking to their old routines and doing their old things, and he has some semblance of his old life despite the world having ended. But then a group of strangers comes into town and pretty much wrecks Jack's status quo, and we see how he reacts to that, as well as flashback scenes that show us how he got there to begin with. Everything Dead and Dying is written by Tate Brumble, with interior art by Jacob Phillips. Our colorist is Pip Martin, and our letterer is Aditya Bidikar. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And our covers, which are really beautiful and scenic, are done by Phillips and Tonchi Zonyik. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Despite some obvious differences, I think it's kind of easy to compare Everything Dead and Dying to The Walking Dead, and I mean, I think if you liked The Walking Dead, you'll like Everything Dead and Dying, but Everything Dead and Dying is more of a focused character study than The Walking Dead ever was. The Walking Dead was like an ensemble piece, and frankly, there's a little bit more raw emotion present, I think, in Everything Dead and Dying, because it's really a story about grief and love and how we hold on to things, sometimes to our own detriment, and sometimes despite very clear evidence that they are gone and not coming back. And we do see the lengths that Jack is willing to go to in order to, in his mind, protect the ones he loves. And in that sort of tragic sense, it is a beautiful story. I thought issue 4, which just came out last week, really gives us a great sense of why Jack cares so much, not just about his family, but about this whole town, and what they mean to him on a personal level. And the art by Jacob Phillips and the colors by Pip Martin have a really, gritty, dirty, almost tainted look to them that really draw you into the story and the world. And of course, there's no shortage of gore in this story. Everything Dead and Dying really snuck up on me in the best way possible. I was very pleasantly surprised. I believe there's just one issue left that comes out in January, which I will be reading quite intently. Keep checking back before the end of the year for more Baldy Awards, especially next week, which is when they really kind of kick into high gear. The Baldy Awards, sponsored in theory by Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's, they're not really a sponsor, unless they want to be. Absolute Martian Manhunter numbers 1 through 7 definitely made for one of the more unique comic book reading experiences I had all year. Thus, I give it a Baldy Award, designating it one of my favorite comics of 2025. So naturally, Absolute Martian Manhunter is part of the Absolute line of comic books. Over at DC, the whole Absolute universe, which presents alternate versions of these classic characters, but sort of keeps their core essence intact. That's the idea, at least. And in this story, we meet FBI agent John Jones, who, after a near-death experience, finds that he kind of has a mental passenger, like a Martian entity cohabitating his mind, even though it's not really a Martian. It's kind of weird. And now he finds that he sees the world in a whole new way as this passenger is sort of talking to him, and he navigates not only his job as an FBI agent, but his relationship with his wife and son, and a malevolent white Martian entity that's also out there. Our author for the entirety of Absolute Martian Manhunter thus far has been Dennis Camp. Ditto for our artist, Javier Rodriguez, and our letterer has been Hassan Atsmain Elhau. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This book can get trippy, man, suitably so, given that, we've got this mental, psychological side of things, and that's very much reflected in Javier Rodriguez's pencils. The colors in this book really contribute to that. It's some of the best color work I saw all year. They pop in a way that really adds a layer to the story, which is what great coloring can sometimes do. To that sort of psychedelic end with the layouts and the drawing and the colors and everything, I think issue 4 was my favorite Absolute Martian Manhunter issue of the year. As John and his Martian passenger face a heat wave in the city. Just some beautiful, beautiful stuff there, and the colors really convey the heat and how hot it is. One of the things that's interesting about this Absolute Martian Manhunter stuff is that it doesn't really bear a lot of resemblance to the classic Martian Manhunter, the character that the book is theoretically based on. And I really appreciated that. Absolute Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman still have to be recognizable as Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, just for the sake of iconography, I guess. But because Martian Manhunter is kind of a B or C-list character, you can get a little more out there with him and kind of divert a little more from the source material to benefit the content and the story, and that's what they do here. I actually think that in time, Absolute Martian Manhunter could become maybe the first definitive Martian Manhunter story. I'm not comparing anything here, but kind of like what All-Star Superman is for Superman, or what Batman Year One was for Batman. And it'll be really interesting to see in the decades to come how Absolute Martian Manhunter bleeds over and affects canonical Martian Manhunter. You know, kind of like the success of Miles Morales over at Marvel led to him being incorporated into the main Marvel universe. Like, is this sort of what Martian Manhunter is going to become in the main DC universe? Either way, I really think Absolute Martian Manhunter is a masterpiece. Maybe the single best ongoing book that DC put out in 2025. Keep checking back until the end of the year for more Baldy Awards. The Baldy Awards, sponsored in theory by Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's, they're not really a sponsor, unless they want to be. You know, its title notwithstanding, Sleep has not been a restful book. Not a restful reading experience. If anything, it's a masterclass in the building of suspense and tension. And thus, I bestow upon it a Baldy Award, naming it officially one of my favorite comics of 2025. So our story is about a young man named John who lives in a small town. Destruction and damage and devastation follow in his wake every time he goes to sleep or passes out or he's unconscious for whatever reason. And we're not talking like a Tommy Wiseau room trashing here, folks. I mean, the devastation that happens when he's asleep is very real. And neither John nor the reader knows what exactly is going on when he passes out. Like, is he turning into a monster? Does he have magic powers? What's the deal here? So our story follows him as he and his friend Tabby try and unravel the mystery here and save him. As far as credits for this book are concerned, Xander Cannon is a one-man show. He does the writing, the art, the lettering, everything as far as I know. What I love about this book as much as anything is that it's like a roller coaster that just keeps going up and up and up. You know, the tension and the drama and the suspense just sort of keeps compounding. Jonathan gets more and more afraid. The devastation gets bigger and worse. It's to the point where in the 7th issue that just came out a few days ago, he's in an asylum. He's got a straitjacket on, and yet the devastation continues. And as readers, we're as blind to what's going on as John is. You know, we don't know what he's turning into, what's happening to him. So we're more and more desperate for answers as that tension mounts. That roller coaster effect of mounting tension and drama is not always an easy dynamic to write and come by. So when you get it, you don't want to take it for granted. So I credit Xander Cannon here for what he was able to do. The sort of cartoony style that Xander Cannon uses here for the visuals is really an interesting juxtaposition with the suspense horror vibe. I feel like that, as much as anything, is what makes it a really interesting comic book, as opposed to, you know, what it might be as a short story or a novel or a TV show or something. The book is in black and white, which is another interesting visual dynamic. We are playing with color a little bit here, though, which adds a certain depth to the presentation. I believe there's only one issue of this book left, Sleep number 8. And I'm very, very curious to see if and how this book sticks the landing. You know, every roller coaster has to sort of round that slope and take the plunge at some point. And I'm very curious to see what the figurative plunge looks like here. Keep checking back until 2026 for more Baldy Awards as we continue to celebrate my favorite comics of 2025, the Baldy Awards, sponsored in theory by Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's, they're not really a sponsor, unless they want to be. The Baldy Awards continue, ladies and gentlemen, as we celebrate my favorite comics of 2025. You know, the older I get, the more I've come to appreciate comics with a set of balls on them, meaning books that take a risk, books that have something to say, books where the storytellers kind of put themselves out there a little bit. And one book that I really want to recognize this year for having said set of balls is, perhaps ironically, Flo from Mad Cave Studios. Flo is about a young girl named Dara who goes to sleepaway camp and gets her first period, but because she hasn't really been educated on what that means for her body and what she should do, other kids are able to take advantage of her, manipulate her, etc. And now, years later, Dara is seemingly out for revenge against those who humiliated her all those years ago. The kids who were with her at that camp are starting to see some occultish effects in their day-to-day lives. We're specifically looking at Flo issues 1 through 4 here. There is a 5th and final issue which is set to come out next month, I believe. Our author here is Paula Sevenbergen, and our penciler is Claudia Balboni. Our colors are by Fabi Marquez, and our letters are by Jody Troutman. Our covers, which have been a big highlight for this book, are by Aniki. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Now, to be clear, Flo is not strictly a book about period stuff, as I've been calling it. As you progress, it kind of turns into a revenge story with like an occult twist to it. But the period stuff is the inciting incident, really. And the story is largely marketed and framed as a story that has period stuff in it. And that's gutsy considering how large the male audience for comics is. And in my opinion, they've probably got a high propensity to recoil when they see that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that's right, by the way. I'm just saying that's probably a typical male response. But the creators of Flo put themselves out there and told the story anyway. And I so admire the guts that takes. And there is a certain message, a moral here, about young girls, preteen girls getting the right kind of education about what happens to their bodies when they reach that point in their lives. And tragically, a lot of young girls around the world don't get that education. And that's the kind of thing that deserves to be talked about, whether in the context of a comic book horror story or not. The art here by Claudia Balboni is really effective, especially when it comes to the occultish effects that some of our characters face all these years later. And again, I really want to put over the covers here because there is a certain degree of overtness and bluntness to them. I mean, they don't necessarily beat you over the head with the period stuff, but I mean, they let you know that it's here. This is another book where if I had the chance to put a comic book in the hands of John Q. Public in 2026, it might be this one. It'd be a big contender. People should see this book. It really demonstrates the vast storytelling potential of the comic book medium, in my opinion. And also, the underlying message is very strong. Keep checking back until the end of the year for more Baldy Awards. The Baldy Awards, of course, are sponsored, in theory, by Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's. They're not really a sponsor, unless they want to be. The Baldy Awards continue, ladies and gentlemen, celebrating my favorite comics of 2025. But before we give out our 10th and final Baldy Award within the next couple of days, let's do some honorable mentions. What does that mean? Pretty much what it sounds like. These are books that I just want to give a quick hat tip to as we close out the year. The big Superman movie came out this year, of course, and as such, DC tried to up their game with the Superman comics they put out. They succeeded at least partially. The one ongoing book that I really want to tip my hat to here is Action Comics, at least the issues that Mark Waid worked on with Skylar Patridge, sort of the new adventures of Superboy. Really looking forward to seeing more of that in 2026. But there were a couple of one-off Superman issues that I thought really stole the show. The first being Superman Treasury 2025 by Dan Jurgens and Bruno Redondo. Really captured Superman's place in the context of the larger DC universe. And then the Superman Red and Blue 2025 special contained a couple of really good short Superman stories. From the Marvel side of things, anytime Ryan North writes Fantastic Four, it's usually good to great, and that was definitely the case with the Fantastic Four output from Marvel this year. Behemoth from Dark Horse Comics was an early favorite of mine this year, about a group of people that gets swallowed by a big kaiju monster during an attack on a big city. I had a lot of fun with that book. News from the Fallout from Image Comics gets an honorable mention, largely for the artistic presentation. Very different, very distinct, very memorable. The Slasher's Apprentice from Mad Cave Studios was again a lot of fun. A story about a young hacker girl who becomes an apprentice to a Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees type slasher killer. Wild Animals, another Mad Cave Studios book, really packed an emotional punch, more emotional than I anticipated. And of course, suitably violent. The titular Wonder Woman series this year from DC wasn't quite as strong as it was in 2024, but it's still very strong. Stronger than it's been in a long, long time, like we're talking decades. And you know, Toxie Team Up #1 from Ahoy Comics might have been my favorite single issue of the year. It's at least one of my favorites. It involves the Jesus Christ from the Second Coming books, teaming with the Toxic Avenger. Very contemplative, very insightful. Check back before the new year, folks, for the final Baldy Award of 2025, the Baldy Awards, sponsored in theory by Jimmy John's. Jimmy John's, they're not really a sponsor, unless they want to be. Well, as you folks hopefully know, all month long we've been doing the Baldy Awards, celebrating my favorite comics of 2025. And the final Baldy Award of 2025 goes to, wait for it, Supergirl from the folks over at DC. And yes, of course, I know that there's a new Supergirl movie coming out in 2026, but believe me or not, this has nothing to do with that movie. The new volume of Supergirl, specifically issues 1 through 8, which came out in 2025, have earned this award completely on their own merit. This book follows Supergirl as she returns to her hometown of Midvale, having various adventures, of course, facing numerous enemies, and even making some new friends along the way, including an apprentice of sorts. The big driving creative force for this book is Sophie Campbell. She's the author for all of the issues, as well as the interior and cover artist for most of them. Meanwhile, our colorist is Tamra Bonvillain, and our letterer is Becca Carey. We did have some guest artists work on the book this year, though. Paulina Goncho, Rosie Camp, and Haining. And our guest colorists this year were Kendall Good, Marissa Louise, and Alex Guimarães. You know, when I gave Hyde Street the Baldy Award earlier this month, the first Baldy Award actually, I talked about how I rarely had more fun with a comic book than that one. With Supergirl, it was largely the same situation. This book is fun, it's bright, both tonally and visually, you know, it's colorful, and it's very girly, as odd as that might sound coming from me. It just feels like a book about 3 young, modern, powerful female characters coming together and having superhero adventures. And you know, as simple as that sounds, it's not as common as you might think in an industry where everybody in recent history has wanted to be dark and serious and stuff. Supergirl is not afraid to have fun, okay? Whether it's with the inclusion of a character like Princess Shark, which I've really enjoyed this year, or with issue number 4, I believe it was, where the various super pets that Kara has just have adventures of their own. The book also makes a point to incorporate retro elements from Supergirl's history and kind of incorporate them into the modern era. Issue 8, which just came out this month, did that very effectively. Lesla Lars, Supergirl's arch nemesis turned apprentice, is another one of those retro elements. And I'd actually never heard of that character until I read this series. I've pointed out a couple of times this year that I really appreciate the way that Lesla in particular is drawn. She doesn't look like your typical female superhero, especially compared to Kara. She's taller, she's a little bit curvier, she's got a different kind of figure, but the book doesn't really point that out or talk about it. She just is the way she is. To my earlier point about the book being girly, you can tell that Sophie Campbell loves kind of playing dress up with Supergirl and the other characters. We've tried on various costumes with Supergirl early in the series, and I think in issue 3, our main characters go to a goth party of sorts. That was really fun. The book really overachieves in my estimation. I did not expect to be having this much fun with this Supergirl book, but it's at or near the top of my stack each week it comes out. The first trade for this new volume of Supergirl comes out in late March or early April. I think it's called Mid Adventures in Midvale. Don't sleep on this one, folks. It's a lot of fun.